episode of the Festival of Bharat with me, Pujita Krishna. I have with me today a guest on our show who I'm sure doesn't need much of an introduction. She's a social media influencer. She's a multilingual author who has authored 5 books in the Dharmic and Hindu sphere and speaks impassionedly about matters that are significant in the larger battle for the protection and preservation of our culture, tradition, and values. Please join me in welcoming Shefali Vaidya ji,
Namaste.
to talk with us about her new book, How to See a Temple. Shefali ji, welcome.
Thank you so much, Pujita. It's always a pleasure to come back to Festival of Bharat. And as you know, it's one of my favorite platforms, and it's always a pleasure to talk to any team member here.
Thank you, Shefali ji. You've been very, very kind. You've been traveling. I hope you're rested and well rested after your travels.
You know what they say now, that you need a vacation
From a
to
vac-
recover from a vacation. So I'm kind of going through that right now. I had a fantastic 1 week in Leh, so now it's coming back to the humdrumness of normal life is a bit, it takes a little bit of time.
Need another vacation for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So, Shefali ji, your book, How to See a Temple, is a translation of the original in Marathi by Dr.
Yes,
Deglurkar.
yes,
So,
yes.
how did this come about?
See, this book is actually more of a primer. It's more of a easy to understand guide like book, which sort of helps the how would I say, the temple going Hindu to understand what are the different parts of the temple, what are their significance, and how did this institution called temples came about, and how did it grow architecturally, philosophically, as an institution, what is its importance in the socio-cultural sphere. There are lots of books on this subject, that is true, but they're all meant for scholars, not meant for lay people. But this book is written in a very easy to understand style, but at the same time it doesn't compromise on the scholarly content of the book, as in the book talks about exactly how many different styles of temple building are there, how did the temple start getting built in India, what is the significance of a temple, what are the significance of the different parts of the temple, what are the different styles like the Dravida style, the Nagara style, and everything. And it's written in a very easy to understand, very lucid style. And I liked the book when I first read it in Marathi. It's my guru's book actually. I learned temple architecture and iconography from him. My guru, Dr. G.P. Deglurkar, was a chancellor of Deccan College, and he is known as one of the foremost authorities on iconography and temple architecture in India. And he's written many books on temple architecture. But this book I particularly liked because it was written in a very easy to understand way, and it was written keeping in mind the ordinary temple goer who goes to temples anyway to pray, but may or may not know what is the significance of the temple, what are the different parts of the temple, and who might have questions in his or her mind, like what does this shikara mean? How is this shikara different from the North Indian shikara? What are the different elements of it? Why is this murti placed here? And why is the temple situated on a high platform? And things like that. And those are the questions that this book aims to answer. So I really loved the book. This book is a bestseller. It's gone into some 10 or 12 editions in Marathi, in original Marathi. And I wanted to turn it into English so that it gets a wider audience. So I asked my guru for permission. He was very happy. And that's how I started translating the book. And when I started translating, when I was reading, it was very easy because Deglurkar sir had written it in a style that was very easy to understand. And it's a one-time read book, I mean, you just start reading it and you complete. Small book, you complete it at one shot, and then you keep going to it again and again whenever you have some problems or whenever you have some queries, or you carry that book with you whenever you see temples, and it's kind of like a easy reckoner. But I realized while translating that what is written in the simplest, easiest of the styles is actually the most difficult to translate, because you are supposed to not compromise anywhere on the essence of the book, on the scholarly content of the book, but at the same time, you are supposed to make that language as easy to understand and as lucid and as full of examples as the original writer has intended it to do. And that's it looks a lot easier than when you actually start doing doing it. But it was quite a challenge, yes.
I know, I can totally understand that. And I mean, I've been through the book myself, and I have to say that it is, for a lot of people who go to temples and are clueless about, actually, a lot of people are, a lot of facts have been put down in that temple, in that book,
Yeah.
which many average people are absolutely unfamiliar with. So I'm going to ask you a few questions, which will probably throw some. I would want people to buy the book. So I don't want you to give away everything, but whatever little thing, if you can throw some light on a few aspects of what you've written about. You talk about, in the book, of course, there is mention of a brief mention of how the temple building process evolved over a period of time, over history.
Mhm.
So could you talk a little bit about that? Because in the Vedic period, there is hardly any mention of temple building as it came in
Yes.
the medieval period, etc. So
Yes,
how
yes.
did that happen?
So, as the book says, and as my guru has also said in his lectures repeatedly, that there is no evidence of temples belonging to the Vedic era, which doesn't mean that there were absolutely no places of worship. There could have been, like even Yagyashalas were also places of worship, and Vedic religion was mainly a religion of yagyas and chanting the ritas. And at that time, they did build different buildings for the Yagyashala, but those buildings were made from perishable material. They were made from wood, they were thatched buildings, and they were built specifically for the purpose of a yagya being conducted. And there were chittis, the yagya vedis, which, I mean, there is a whole science of geometry dedicated just to the different kinds of yagya chittis and how they are to be arranged, and what kind of yagyas are you supposed to do in different kinds of yagya vedis. So that is a science that has been very well documented. But having said that, we find that the earliest examples of temple building and temple buildings that have survived come from around 2nd century BCE, okay, about 200 years before Common Era. And that is because previously it is possible that temples were being built, but they were being built probably of wood or cloth or perishable material, or they might have had thatched roofs, and it is possible that they didn't survive this long. But we do have mentions of Murti Puja even in Veda itself, very sparing ones, but the way they have described the gods and goddesses with the complexion in certain way, the hair in a certain way, it is possible that they visualized some kind of murti, which is what later on we started codifying and started building murtis, not building, sculpting murtis and building temples. And as always, if you see the development of human architecture where people stay, you will see that people have first dwellings of human beings that we can find are caves. They were either natural caves, or they were some natural cave like thing which has been scooped out further, and people started living there. And from there, the architecture, secular architecture I'm talking about, where people are living, that our journey has been from caves to skyscrapers, right? So skyscrapers these days are the most urban, most considered to be most evolved style of human dwellings in secular human history, in non-religious human history, so to speak. Secular is a wrong term to use. But similarly, even the development of temple architecture in India has been exactly like that. So the earliest temples or places of worship that you can find are the cave temples. Either they are belonging to the Ajivika sect, or they are belonging to the Buddhist religion, or Jain Pantha, or Hindu caves that you see. And from there, we have gone on to build, Mane, Indians in general, our ancestors have built temples which are 13 storied high, which is like the Brigadishwara temple in Tamil Nadu, or you can take the Konark temple in Odisha, which are more or less contemporary. And you will see that the process of temple building has started from, again, worshipping in caves or scooping out caves, natural caves, and making them bigger, broader, and praying there, to building huge shikaras which are 13 storied, 14 stories high. And that is kind of a same process that is mimicking the process of our architecture that you use for living. Because just as human beings require houses to dwell in, our homes are places to be feel safe in. Similarly, gods also require places. So that is what a devalaya is. It's literally a home of a god. Deva alaya. So that is how the development of a temple has been in India. And eventually, as population started increasing, as temple buildings started getting prestige, as it started getting royal patronage, as it started getting money, temples started becoming bigger and bigger structures. And not just structures, they started becoming bigger and more important socio-cultural institutions. So temples were schools, temples were theaters for dance and cultural performances, temples had their own banks, temples had their own animals, temples had their own lands, temples had their own communal spaces where people could come together and talk about the affairs of the village, or what is going on in their lives. So the temple was a focal point of the socio-economic life of a Indian village. And even now you can see that. In cities, not so much, but even today, if you go to any village in general, in any part of India, you will see that the temple is the focal point of the socio-cultural life of the village. Because even today, women gather on particular days to do pujas of Lakshmi, and that's how they meet and socialize. Old people, senior citizens, they come to the temple every day, and that is where they socialize. On festival days, even when a young child starts his or her Akshar Puja, then they take him or her to the nearest temple first, and they make him or her do the Sri Ganesha, and then they put the child in the school. So all these traditions still exist, and I'm talking about Pune because I live in Pune. You just travel 30 kilometers from the city center of Pune, and you go to these villages that still exist in the outskirts of Pune, and you will see that the temple is buzzing. It's not a place where people just go, just fold their hands, stand in front of the god for 2 minutes, and they go about their work. That's not how temples in rural Indian community work. Even now, they are a thriving, living space where the people of the village come together to conduct their business, to talk, to socialize, to pray, everything. It's like love, eat, pray, as they
That's
say in the
right.
book, right? All of this happens in an Indian temple even today.
It's just that the space is more consecrated, right? Like somebody once, a scholar who remarked some time back, and I did a similar talk with him, Jayachandran. He told me that think of temples as a modern day or the olden day malls, you know,
Yes,
but
yes.
except that these were consecrated spaces. So
Yes,
yeah,
yes. So there was no frivolity there. There was always a sacred basis to whatever you're doing. I
correct.
mean, people would have fun, they would dance, they would fall in love,
Yes,
they would form marriage
yes,
alliances, they would do everything, and they would do it with a great deal of joy. But there was some sanctity to it. It wasn't,
absolutely.
completely like you just throw money and you get something in return. It was not
Yes,
transactional.
yes, yes. Could you speak on the concept of the Vastu Purusha Mandala, how the temple is conceived of as a human body?
See, as you start tracking the development of the temple from the archaeological proofs that we have, we'll see that the earliest temples that we find in India, like the temple in Sanchi behind the stupa, is basically a very small structure where there is just a garbhagriha, there is just space for the murti to be put in the garbhagriha, and there is a very little, very small kind of a hall outside, which is based on just two pillars. Only 4 or 5 people can at a time sit there. That is it. That is what was the earliest temple. But then, as our philosophy started getting crystallized into design, into architecture, there came a time when a fully developed temple was considered to be the representation of the cosmic Purusha, both vertically as well as horizontally. So horizontally, if you go and you see this in context of a Dravida temple, and you'll see a diagram in the book where it's explained very lucidly. So the outermost prakara, the first the doorway to the temple, is the feet of the Vastu Purusha lying down, and the actual Garbhagriha is this Sahasrar point of the Vastu Purusha, and that is where the murti is kept. The murti is like the bindi. That is the the best part, the most sacred part of the temple, and the shikhara is exactly on top of that murti. That kind of precision our people knew, and that kind of precision our people still know, because if you go to this go to south, or if you go to Odisha, or if you go to Gujarat, where traditional Stapati schools are still very much alive and they're still building new temples, you'll see that no matter how small the temple is or how big the temple is, like the proposed Ram temple in Ayodhya, but they will follow the same principles, and they will make sure that when the temple is built, they first identify a sacred location, they first do garbhadana vidhi, they first plant a little bit of grains in this most sacred spot, and they track its progress, and if it is growing as it's supposed to be, then the prana of that place is very sacred and it's very good for the temple building, and that is where then they decide that the garbhagriha of the temple has to be built, and that is how the temple is built. But this process has taken, it hasn't happened overnight. The development of a temple as a physical manifestation of the Vastupurush Mandala is a process that has taken 700, 800 years, because as our philosophy, as our philosophical concept, as our spiritual concepts have got crystallized into design, and you can see that even in secular design things, right? You first think of something is an abstract idea. It's only then that it is concretized and it becomes a thing. So that process doesn't happen overnight. That process doesn't happen magically. There's a lot of effort involved into it. There's a lot of thought that has gone into it. There's a lot of time that has gone into it. And this is exactly sort of happened. So this is the Vastu Purush Mandala, Vastu Purusha horizontally lying. And then there is a temple as a representation of the Vastu Purusha standing also, where the antarala of the temple, that is a little space between the garbhagriha and the sabha mandapa, is the neck. It's called a griva also. It's called a neck, if you see the diagram in the book. And then the kalasha is the head of the temple, of the standing Vastu Purusha. So that is how this concept has, and I consider it to be one of the most spiritually elevating concept, that to translate this idea that there is a Vastu Purush Mandala, and to represent a physical structure like a temple, sort of, exactly interpose one against the other. It's a remarkable achievement, I
I
think.
agree. What a concept! What a phenomenal concept, right?
Absolutely.
um, how does this? So there are many aspects to this. Of course, even the design of the temples, and then of course the book talks about the various classifications of the temples also. Nagara, Dravida, as we have as mentioned. But there are certain elements, like for example, the purpose of the Surasundaris. The book talks about the Surasundaris, which are basically sculptures of Suras. Could you talk a little bit about that? Why? What's the purpose of these sculptures?
So, as I said, the temple was a socio-cultural institution. It was not just a place to pray. It was not just a place where people would go, stand in front of God like we do now and just pray for 2 minutes and then come out. Temples were supposed to teach you about different aspects of life, your social life, your religious life, your other all aspects of life. It was basically a medium of instruction itself, the temple itself. And sculptures were used, particularly sculptures on the exterior of the temple, were used to teach you very important spiritual lessons. And that is where Surasundari sculptures, all the sculptures of women doing different things, were used as a symbol to teach people about different aspects of life. For example, you see a Surasundari who is fighting a scorpion. Like, you can see that she's, kind of the way she's standing in a tribanga, and you should see this Surasundari statue in many temples. You see it in Patan, you see it in the Hoysala temples, you see it in many temples. There is a reason why the scorpion is supposed to represent the sting of human desires. And if you juxtapose it against the Santa Sahitya, or the literature that our saints have said, where they've used that same Rupaka, where they've used the same metaphor, where they've used the same symbolism, you can identify that it's the same idea that has been represented in stone on the temples, where the Surya Sundari is shown fighting off the scorpion. That is supposed to teach the temple goer that when you're going to the temple, you should not be stung by worldly desires. This is a time for you to leave your worldly desires behind. And then, as you climb the steps of the temple, that is why temples are always built on a very high platform. Each step is supposed to tell you that you're leaving your worldly desires behind. As you climb up, you're making yourself worthy of that communion, of that meeting with the divine soul and yourself, of that Parabrahman which you are going to meet. So in a way, it is kind of like a union between the Jivatma and Paramatma, which is supposed to happen ultimately in human life. The temple is also supposed to teach you exactly that. So as you climb the steps of the temple, you leave behind all your worldly desires, all your petty petty feelings, and then you raise yourself, you elevate yourself. Then you reach the temple, and then you're supposed to first do the bahir pradakshina. You're supposed to first circumvent the temple from the outside, see all the sculptures that are there on the outside, and they're supposed to teach you what are these sculptures that are typically on the outer side of the temple. They are sculptures of the Devis and Devtas as well, but also of the Surasundaris, which teach you about different vikaras of life. There are panels from Ramayana and Mahabharata, which also are supposed to teach you about life. And there are scenes from secular life of that time. Festivals are represented on the outside on certain layers. The wars are represented on certain layers, and and also Mithuna sculptures. Everybody talks about the Mithuna sculptures on the Khajuraho temples and also on so many temples. Why are they there? They're there on the exterior because no part of life is taboo. That is also part of your life. Of all your four purusharthas, dharma, artha, kama, moksha, kama is also very important purushartha. It's not like you completely discarding it. It's there, but it's there on the outside. So you go take a round outside, see all the sculptures, understand all this, leave all your base desires behind, and then you enter the temple. Once you go inside the temple, the exterior of the temple is far more ornate than the interior of the temple. And as you go from Garbhagriha to Antarala, Antarala literally means space. And it is the space for you to just step back. You have seen the exterior of the temple. You have learnt your lessons from seeing all those sculptures. Then you have gone into a Sabha Mandapa where there are dances going on, where there are discourses going on, where there is music going on. You're supposed to enjoy that as well. Take your time, enjoy all of that. But then you go into the Antarala, and at that Antarala, you're supposed to stop a while, get your mind centered again,
Right.
because after this you're going to do what you have come to do for, which is basically to have a darshan of the deity. And then you go towards the Garbhagriha, and there is a big step dividing the devotee from the god. And in many South Indian temples particularly, they don't even let you go inside the Garbhagriha. You can only see it from outside. And the Garbhagriha inside is as bare as it can be possible. It just has very simple walls, and there is a very beautiful murti there. In olden times, in now many temples have electrical lights. In South India, they still don't. They still have only the
Especially
lamp
Kerala.
lights. Yes, and that has a meaning, because that is supposed to be the light of your soul.
Yes.
And that god, that murti that you see, is your soul, is a representation of your soul. It is the Paramatma, and you as a Jivatma are standing outside, and that is your moment of communion. It's a how would I say, it's a metaphor for moksha, where your soul becomes one with the universal soul. This is supposed to remind you that that is your ultimate goal. So you come to the temple once a day, once a week, once a month, once a year, whatever. But that temple visit is supposed to remind you that this is not it. This is just a
Yes.
point in your spiritual progress, and this is supposed to remind you that that is what your ultimate goal is about.
True. Very true. I think this is something that should be taught at a very early age. This book, or various versions of it should be made available, because unfortunately, I think even the older generation people do it as something that they have been taught, and so it's part of our genetic makeup, and we go to the temple
Yes,
and all of that.
yes,
But to understand this and to know it is probably something that should start early. Unfortunately, we've that needs to be addressed, I think.
yes. You know what I really feel bad about is whenever I go to see a temple that is 400 or 500 years old, and I see the kind of thought that has gone into building that structure. And I'm not just talking about the you call it, the expertise, the physical expertise of carving murtis or building a temple. That is of course remarkable, and I have seen many countries in the world, I've seen many monuments, but
Right.
there's nothing really that compares to Indian temples.
Yes.
That's my honest opinion. But more than that, every part that is carved in a temple is not without its meaning. Nothing is random.
Mm.
So even if you see that there is a murti standing in Tribanga and another murti standing in Samabanga, another murti standing sitting, there is a lot of meaning to it. There's a lot of thought that has gone behind it. And that thought always amazes me, particularly if you go to Ellora and if you see the Kailash cave, Verul as they call it, that's in Maharashtra. That is actually a three-storied complete temple with a Mukhamandapa, a Sabha Mandapa, a Garbhagraha, a the galleries on the side, a full Pradakshina path, everything. And it is carved from one
One.
single hillside. It's basically carved top down. To be able to do all this and to translate it into a solid chunk of rock is something that is really mind-boggling. I have been to Ellora I think some 12 or 15 times now, and every time I go, I find something that I haven't discovered the last time, and it's really mind-boggling, because this kind of expressions, this kind of attention to detail, this kind of thought that has gone into building a temple or building any kind of building is not something that you can see anywhere else in the world.
True. Are these so how I mean the book really doesn't get into the agamic aspect of
Yes,
temple building, but would you like to talk a
yes,
little bit about that, as in how much of the temples, like a lot of temples in the south I know are agamic based,
yes.
do you want to throw some light on that?
See, this is not a scope of this book, at
Yes.
least, and I would like to, I can talk about it,
Yeah.
but I would like to keep this discussion
Sure.
limited to this book,
Okay.
because the agamic base and the agamic philosophy behind the temples is a whole different ballgame together, and that would probably require
Uh,
a discussion of another hour for that.
yes.
So let's
Okay.
keep that for some other day.
Okay, let's talk about the when we talk of temples. Of course, it's impossible not to talk of the destruction of the temples, the many temples that have been lost over the years, and of course publicly now if people are talking about it, but for many years we were not even allowed to mention it. So we've had historians, unfortunately, historians like Sitaram Goelji, who was sidelined, but who's done tremendous work in documenting.
Yes, yes.
Would you like to talk, since it's connected a little bit? Would you like to talk about that? Should we focus our attention on the temples that have been lost, and the need to resurrect? Um, Perhaps that's already happening in some parts of the country. These
You know, there was a year, I think it was 2017 or 2018, I don't remember. There was that one year I was on a temple exploration tour, and I went through 5 states. I went to Rajasthan, I went to Gujarat, I went to Karnataka, I went to Tamil Nadu, and I went to Andhra. And Maharashtra, of course, 6 states, you could say. And everywhere I went, and everywhere I beautiful 1,000-year-old, 1,200-year-old temples. But every single of them, it bore marks of destruction. The murtis were broken, the temple pillars were defaced, the sculptures were, particularly female Surasundari and female Devi sculptures, were defaced very brutally and in a very typical way. Like the breasts were hacked off and the nose was hacked off for female murtis. And you see this across the board, okay? You see it in Rajasthan, you see it in Maharashtra, you see it in Karnataka. And everywhere I asked, who did this? And the answer was Malik Kafur. Because in that one year, he has basically gone on a temple destruction. He was not the only one. You know that. There have been many before him and there have been many after him. But it was so hurtful to see those murtis. And there were murtis where there is no murti anymore. It's just the feet that's there in that empty niche. And you can see that in there is a temple right outside Pune, that's 30 kilometers from Pune. And that temple is a very beautiful temple built by Yadava kings, but which has very distinct Chalukyan influences. And once upon a time, outside the temple, there were many Surasundari sculptures, and you can see those niches even today. But there are every single of those sculptures have been defaced, and some of them, the entire murti has been hacked off, and all you can see are basically imprints of the feet. It hurts. It really made me cry. And you can see that in Madhya Pradesh, you can see that in UP. There is not a single temple in North India now,
Yeah.
unless it was hidden somewhere deep in the forest or whatever, which has not borne the brunt of this wanton destruction. And why? Just because some other religion thinks that murtis should not be worshipped? They couldn't even see the beauty of it. I'm saying, okay, you don't feel like praying in front of these murtis, that I can understand. That may be your belief. But can you not appreciate it as a work of art? Can you not appreciate it as somebody has created this out of solid stone? And you call yourself great patrons of art, and people tell us that they made great buildings and palaces and gardens, and they were lovers of beauty and aesthetics, but you couldn't see beauty in these creations, in these human creations. This is something that I don't understand. It's like there is a personal vendetta, there's a personal hatred of anything that's beautiful, and that is why these murtis have been defaced. It really, really hurts me. In that book by Sitaram Goyalji and Arun Shauriji, they have mentioned that there are some 40,000 temples that have been destroyed across India during whatever the centuries of Islamic rule. And you can see that. Unfortunately, most of the time that you go now, the ASI appointed guides will tell you that, okay, the murtis have been, they will tell you the murtis have been destroyed. And you can see that the murtis have been destroyed, right? From Modera to Somnath to everywhere. And but they won't tell you who destroyed it unless you specifically ask for it. And even when you ask for it, they will say, make a vague generic statement like foreign invaders destroyed it. So I was like, which foreign invaders? Where did they come from? Then they will tell you, nahi, yahan pe Malik Kafur aaya tha. So I said, they have names, no? So why are you not telling the names? Why are
Because
you not saying that these temples were destroyed?
years of conditioning.
Exactly. You go to Kashi Vishwanath Mandir, and that is like a slap in the face of Hindus for an eternity, because Aurangzeb could have destroyed the entire temple. He did destroy the entire temple, but he kept a part of that wall for a reason. You can see that it's a temple. Even a blind person can say that it's a temple wall, one wall of the mosque, that monstrosity. But people are still not believing, and I couldn't believe my eyes when a few years ago there was this epitome of stupidity of a woman who is famous for her idiotic columns in Times of India. She called it syncretic architecture. Syncretic architecture.
But that's part of recorded history. She can't even say it. I mean, everybody knows it.
Exactly. Everybody knows. And even if it's not recorded history, you go there and you see it's so obvious. There are these three ugly domes and there is a temple wall beneath it right there.
When I visited Banaras in 2011, I remember there were security guards posted there, and I think for a
Yeah.
long time they were there because they were.
Even now, if they don't allow you to take pictures and all.
So what is? I mean, people should know better than to make these kind of or say such bald-faced lies.
Yeah.
It's absolutely it's a falsehood. I mean, how can you say that?
Then once I think I was in Kangra or somewhere, even there temples have been destroyed. And there they said it's erosion ho gaya, earthquake ho gaya, everything ho gaya. But other than Islamic destruction, everything else he told me. So I knew the history. Then I said, but didn't this happen? Didn't this invasion happen in this year? He said, yes, madam, it did happen. Then I said, why are you not telling me? He said, no, we are told that, people from all backgrounds come to see these temples. So we are actually, when we are getting our training, we are told to stay away from contentious topics. I said, it's not about contentious topic or not. It's about
It's
truth.
wonderful.
Like I'm from my home state of Goa. I mean, everywhere else in India, most of the temples have been destroyed by Islamic invaders. But in Goa, the temples have been destroyed by the Portuguese and the missionary orders. And there are records, their own records, which say that in 2 consecutive years in Salsette and in Bardez alone, 300 temples were destroyed in one district and some 272 temples were destroyed in another district in 1 year, big or small. So these are records. This is actual history, and nobody can deny it. It's not about what you believe in. It's not about what is your worldview. It's about actual documented fact that there were Hindu temples and they were destroyed simply because some other religion said that, okay, I don't believe in your god. Your gods don't have a right to exist, so we'll destroy it. This is something that I just don't get.
Absolutely. Um, Shefali ji, you mentioned the temples in Goa and the Portuguese, destruction, willful destruction of temples in Goa. Could you talk about, since we are on the subject, and you have, of course, in the past also spoken about, in fact, brought it to light. A lot of people, honestly, had no clue. A lot of people had absolutely no clue that Goa was ruled by the Portuguese, not the British. I mean, it's that bad. So could you please talk a little bit about the, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So Goa has been the part of India which has been colonized the longest. The Portuguese came to Goa in 1510, much before the British came to India, and they left in 1962, 61, sorry, much after the British left
Yes.
in 1947. And in this 450 years of rule, the first 150 odd years were the most brutal ones. At that point of time, they controlled very few areas of Goa, mostly the coastal areas, three districts basically, Bardes, Tiswadi, and Salset. And those areas that had these beautiful temples along the coast, along the rivers, all of these temples were destroyed. And wherever possible, the people from that village, when they realized that the temples were going to be destroyed, they tried to save all they could. They tried to save the murtis, as many murtis as they could. And in those days, when traveling was so difficult, they physically carried those murtis, and those murtis had to be carried with a protocol. Remember, it wasn't like you just carried a murti and you ran away with it, put it in your backpack, and went somewhere. No, it was a murti in the puja. So you had to give it puja. You had to offer it puja upachara even when it was being taken from one place to another. And that is what people did in rest of India as well. Meenakshi Jain
Yes.
ji has documented it in her book. But the Goa. So they took those murtis and they took them across the river to a area of Goa now known as Ponda, then known as Antruz Mahal, which was at that point of time under a Hindu king. And they kept those murti there, and for about 100 years or so, those murtis were housed in very small makeshift structures, which was basically like thatched huts. But people did pujas there. They didn't allow the murtis to be destroyed. The temples were destroyed in many places, churches were built, but they didn't allow the murtis whenever possible. After about 100 years, when the Maratha rule became very powerful and there were a lot of Goans in high position in the Maratha Darbar, that's when they got the money. And by that time, even Portuguese fanaticism had reduced a little. So then they bought more lands and then they built temples. So there was a period of about 100 years when no new temple was being built in Goa. And those 150 years, people forgot the traditional art of temple building. And then whatever they remembered, they juxtaposed it against the new things that they learned, and then they built temples in a certain way. Which is why if you see Goan temples today, except for the Tamdi Surla temple in Tamdi Surla Mahadev temple, which is built in stone, you will see that all other temples are built in laterite stone basically, and they are built in a completely different way. They don't have a shikhara, they have an octagonal dome on top of it. But at the same time, the builders of these temples also remembered that a temple has to have a pushkarini, a temple has to have a prakaram, a temple has to have a sabha mandap, a temple has to have a antarala, a temple has to have a shikhara, a temple has to have a pradakshina pata. And they included all these elements, but at the same time, the Goan temples, as you see them today, are markedly different from, say, temples in
South
South
India.
India or temples in North India. Even they are neither Dravid style architecture, they are neither Nagara style architecture. They have their own idiom which has evolved because for 100 150 years there were no temples being built. And in those days, the art of temple building was basically passed on traditionally from father to son, from mother to daughter, right? There were no schools or there were no architecture colleges where people could go and learn to become a sthapati. So there was a lot of knowledge that was lost in these 100 years. That is why the Goan temples are different. Which incidentally, till I was 20 or 21, I hadn't seen any temple other than the temples in Goa. So I thought at that point of time that all temples are like temples in Goa. They're very big, that they're very airy, that they're very clean, and all of that. And the first temple I saw when I was 20 or 19, I don't remember, I was in college. I had gone to Kashi to represent Goa University in some youth festival. And at that point of time, I saw the Kashi Vishwanath
Must have
temple
been.
of that time. And that was the first temple I saw outside Goa. And I honestly couldn't believe. I was also very immature then, but those narrow by
Oh,
lanes and
yes.
you going there and you saw that little temple, and I was like, this can't be. I mean, if Goan temples are so big, why is this temple small? And that's when I started reading the history, and that's when I realized what happened to the original temple and how Ahilya Devi built this temple because that was the best she could do at that point of time. And then I realized the sacrifice of all those generations of Hindus, that they have done so much, but they have not given up their claim on the sacred spot. And that has happened across India. So, in a sense, the history of Indian temples is also the history of the sacrifice of the Hindus, how they kept the civilizational pain intact, how they never gave up their pain, and how they built, rebuilt, and rebuilt temples whenever they could. In S.L. Bhairappa's book Avrana, not Avrana, Sartha, there's a conversation. The time period of this novel is when Islam is attacking India and the temple in Multan is destroyed. That is the time period. So, in the last chapter, the hero of the book meets a guru, a seer, a great person who can see in future. And he has a question in his mind that this mindless destruction of temples, when it is going to stop. And the guru, he doesn't ask him, but it's there in his mind. But the guru can figure it out, the guru can see it. So the guru says that I can understand what is the question that you have in your mind. You are saying that when is this destruction going to stop? This destruction is not going to stop. That's what the guru says. This destruction will continue for many more centuries, but so also will be the desire to rebuild and reclaim. And that, I think, is what we should focus on.
Totally. I absolutely agree. But there's still a lot of challenges, Shefali ji, in terms of the temples being under government control, and I mean I'm sure you're aware of that the Worship Act, the Temples Worship Act, is it which prevents you
Yes, yeah.
from
Place of
Places
worship
of
act,
Worship
yeah.
Act, yes. So there are so many of these challenges which are we still have to fight, and hopefully Ayodhya was a beginning, and you know we
Yes.
can take it forward from there. So, what as individuals, as people who may not have too much clout or whatever, or how can individuals help in this process of preserving this temple culture?
I think all of us can do three things. One is to
So I
document the
missed the first
smallest
point,
temples in area.
Shefali. We missed the first
Yeah, document.
document.
Yeah, first point is document. There are many small temples in our neighborhoods which we do not even notice because they are a part of the landscape. They are part of the urban scape or rural scape that we're used to living in. But if each one of us took the pain to document, to photograph, to write a little about the temples in our neighborhood and say that within 5 kilometers of where I stay, there will be at least 40 to 50 temples in any part of India. So if you just go around with your camera taking pictures and asking the pujari or asking the people who live in the neighborhood, whose is this temple, which goddess, when did it come, who built it? There are lots of, even that is urban history, right? Even
Yes,
that is history. Even if it is 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40. So that is one thing. So that way, at least you know exactly how many temples are there in your neighborhood. So that in case there are any changes, in case there is an encroachment, in case there is a destruction or whatever, at least you have a record that there was a temple like this. Now I read somewhere that ASI controlled temples, there are some 20 or 30 temples which have been documented by ASI in the 1960s. They don't exist anymore because people have encroached over that, or they've destroyed it, they've used the material to build their houses for whatever reason. But for that, to ensure that this doesn't happen, we need to document very, very rigidly, and ordinary people need to document it, not just the government, not just the state ASI or not just the central ASI, but all of us can do it. And social media has made that possible. So if you just document and write about one temple a week in your neighborhood, that is the first thing that you can
that's right.
do. Second thing you can do is take your children, for their vacations to see great temples, which we don't do. And even if we do, we just go to the temple. Inside the temple, we just do namaskar and come out. But that's not what I'm saying. Make your children realize how much our ancestors have sacrificed in building this temple. Take them to see the Brigadeshwara temple. Take them to see the Hoysala temples of Karnataka. Take them to see the Khajuraho temples. Take them to see the new Kashi Vishwanath temple. Teach them what has happened in all these years. And unless we pass this knowledge to our future generation, it's just going to be a temporary band-aid, unless this knowledge has been shared, and unless our future generations have the same connect with the temples that our parents or our grandparents did. That is something that we need to inculcate. And for that, visiting your Kula Devata temple, visiting your Grama Devata temple once a year, which is what our ancestors used to do, is a practice I think we should all do. And it can be a lot of fun. I mean, you can have activities around it. If you have growing children, you can have a treasure hunt. You can go beforehand and click some pictures and send them to your children and say, can you spot this particular sculpture in this temple? This is how you make it more interesting. This is how you make it more interactive. And I have realized it with my own children that if you make it more interactive, if you tell them stories about it, if you teach a sculpture, if you show them a sculpture and tell them the story behind it, they are interested in knowing more. So this is something that we can do second. And the third is, whenever you go to a temple, please ensure that the pujaris or people who are working with the temple, they get the money direct. Especially the temples that are under government control, I don't think people should be putting money in the hundi at all. They should be giving it
That
directly
is,
to the pujaris
right.
or to
Yes.
the seva cars of the temple. And that is the way you are actually getting a whole community invested in the well-being of the temple.
So just for my interest, are the temples in Goa under government control though? I know that temples
No, they're not.
are
They're
not.
not. And that's what I've seen the system work. That the
Yes.
temples in Goa are all under community control, and
Community
they're different
control.
communities and they
Yes.
have their own rules. The
Yes.
government does get involved in auditing, and they have once a year they come to check the records and whatever.
Mm.
That's perfectly okay.
Yes.
But the money that goes to the temple, it goes to the temple,
Yes.
which the temple authority can decide what to use it for. And that is why the Goan temples, you can see that they are so well kept, they're so
Much.
clean,
Yes.
that there are yeah, and there is a lot of social activity also involved by the temple trust in Goa. Schools are run by them, hospitals are run by them, clinics are run by them. There's a lot of good they're doing because they have total control over their funds.
I remember my sister, my mom, we did a trip of just the temples in Goa because my
Yeah.
sister had this idea that, well, Goa, everybody talks about the beaches and the churches and everything, and
Yes.
it's a party
Yeah.
place, but nobody talks about the temple. So we went to, and
Yeah,
we realized, also,
absolutely.
like you mentioned, Ponda, right? I realized, I wondered, why are all the temples only in Ponda district? Where,
Yes.
I mean, there could be the odd temple outside of Ponda, but the you can see that a large number of temples are only concentrated in that area. And we asked,
That's right.
we said, "Ye temple kaun manage karta?" And everybody said that it's the private trust, the community that manage
Yes.
the temples. So that was
And it's a very democratic
very,
system. I mean, every temple has a certain number of people called the Mahajans,
yes,
and they are allowed to vote. And every 3 years, there is a different committee, and the committee can be voted out if it doesn't perform. So it's a system that works very well, and you can see that it
yes,
works very well.
absolutely.
So whenever people talk to me and they ask me, what happens if the government cedes control? Who's going to take care of it? I say the system works. I've seen it work. All my life, I've seen it work.
Very true, very true. So, Shefali ji, any closing remarks? I think you've made some excellent points there about how we as individuals can make a change. Those who are listening will definitely, would have taken those points with, would have made a note of that. And I think we should start doing that. Make a note of it.
Yes, absolutely.
We
Yeah.
just go.
My last thing is obviously, I want everybody to buy this book.
Yes,
It's available on Amazon and it's a very easy to understand book. Carry it with you. Whenever you visit any temple, whether it's a temple in Tamil Nadu, whether it's a temple in MP, whether it's a temple in UP, carry this book with you. And whenever you see something strange or something that you don't understand, this book is structured in such a way that it talks about Garbhagrahas, it talks about Dwarachakas, it talks about the ceiling sculptures, it talks about the murtis in the Garbhagraha, it talks about Surusundaris. So you can actually go to that chapter and you can read exactly what it is that you are puzzled about, and you will get a satisfactory answer for it.
Right. Thank you, Shefali ji, and our best wishes for your book and your next project. Anything that you're planning, something on these lines?
Yeah, I am doing a book on 75 temples of India that everybody should visit. That's a big project. That's a bilingual project, actually. I'm writing the book in Marathi and English at the same time, planning to release both simultaneously. So it's kind of like in 75 years of Indian independence. These are the 75 temples that everybody should see. Hope Ganesha blesses it.
I'm sure. And we look forward to reading it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shefali ji, for making the time for us today. And we'll definitely have you back on our show again when the book releases, the second book releases, the upcoming.
Definitely. Definitely. Thanks a lot, Pujita. Thank you. It was a real pleasure.
And to all those who are watching, please buy the book. It's handy, like Shefali ji says, and you must buy the book and teach your children about temples. And as far as the show is concerned, please like, share, and subscribe. Subscribe to our channel, like on our show, like our show, comment on our show, and share it with your friends. And please keep coming back for more content. So thank you and namaste.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.